Ancient sword replica. An interesting incident occurred in the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, USA. Their museum kept what they thought was a replica of an ancient sword. This Bronze Age weapon was found in the Danube River in Budapest, Hungary in the 1930s. Hungarian archaeologists visiting this museum in the USA asked to take a closer look at the sword, and what they recognized amazed them. The sword was exposed to X-rays to ionize the material it was made from. By measuring the energy and intensity of the X-rays coming out of the material, scientists can find out what it is. In the case of the sword, it has been found to be almost identical to other Bronze Age European swords. It contained a similar content of bronze, copper, and tin. Usually, in this way, archaeologists manage to prove that the artifact turns out to be a fake, and not the original as previously thought. In our case, the study of the sword by archaeologists was shocking. The sword, believed to be a replica, turned out to be almost 3,000 years older than previously thought, but the team of scientists was able to prove this too late, so the weapon will not be shown to visitors in the museum. They want to study it in even more detail in order to understand who it belonged to and how it got there. Researchers believe the sword was placed in the Danube as part of an ancient ritual, perhaps in memory of a lost loved one or a battle. Mystery of the creepy little mermaid revealed. I have already talked about this terrible mermaid several times. On YouTube you could see videos related to this find, but only now the real truth about her has been revealed. Researchers in Japan conducted an in-depth analysis of an artifact kept at the Andrian Temple in the city of Asakuchi. The mummy of an unusual creature, 30 centimeters long, with a scaly fish tail, a human-like head, and 2 arms, aroused the interest of tourists and scientists from all over the world. Scientists carefully studied its composition and published their results. Japanese mythology differs significantly from Greek and Slavic. I would say that in Japanese, the monsters look more creepy and intimidating, so in Japanese myth, there is a certain creature that lives in the water and it is called Ninyo. In fact, these are the same mermaids, only not so beautiful. Hollywood films love to turn the terrible into something beautiful and kind, so they made beautiful mermaids out of Ninyo and made kind and romantic pirates out of medieval sea killers and robbers. No one knows how the Ninyo mummy got into the Andrian Temple, but a handwritten document from 1903 is stored in the same temple, which says that the mermaid was caught in Kochi Prefecture in 1736-1741. In fact, several such specimens are kept in museums in Japan, and only one has been studied in detail today using the most modern equipment. Scientists have used all possible methods to examine the mummy, and now they can say with confidence what it consists of. Typically, such Frankensteins were made from the skeleton of a monkey and a fish, but in our case, the skeleton in the upper part of the body was absent. Scans revealed that the object was made of cloth, cotton, and paper coated with a mixture of charcoal and sandpaste. The head is mostly cotton and covered with what looks like a plaster. The hair on the head is animal hair, and the scales are from 2 kinds of fish. The upper part of the body is covered with the skin of a pufferfish, and the lower part is covered with the scales of one of the types of croaker. The fingernails are made from animal horn, and the sharp-toothed jaw used to belong to some kind of carnivorous fish. Radiocarbon analysis of fish scales show that it was made up to the 1800s. Of course, all this turned out to be fake, and in nature there are no mermaids, no Ninyo. But this object will not cease to be a valuable exhibit in the museum. In any case, the mummy is made of very high quality and thought out, which is why it was able to survive for 200 years. Scientists drank 2.6 billion-year-old water. As soon as the world calmed down from the pandemic, scientists decided to conduct a new, unusual experiment. Without hesitation, it seems to me, they decided to taste the water, which is 2.6 billion years old. Water has been preserved from the time when there was not even free oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, and the first multicellular organisms began to appear almost a billion years later. This water was not like we are used to seeing it. It was salty and sticky. Is it really water though? Water was found in thin cracks in the granite of a Canadian mine. The source was several kilometers below the Earth's surface. Canadian geologist and geochemist Professor Barbara Sherwood Lola decided to taste the oldest water on the planet. She is known for her research on water resources. It's even scary to imagine how much water she tasted in her entire life. According to his statements, the water turned out to be salty, viscous, and having the consistency of light maple syrup. The liquid is extremely salty due to the reaction between water and rock, and also has a higher viscosity than tap water. It also turned orange as minerals begin to form in it. While someone is tasting the viscous liquid of the earth, I will tell you about the oldest skates from China. Bone skates in China. It turns out, 3,500 years ago in China, people were engaged in figure skating. At least they had skates. Archaeologists have discovered many Bronze Age relics in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region in northern China. Artifacts date back to the 16th, 15th centuries BC. Among the finds were the remains of wooden vehicles, cultural artifacts, and bone skates. A pair of skates made from animal bones is the oldest such find in China and Asia in general. Archaeologists believe that skates were used in the early Bronze Age by the ancestors of modern Mongols. They are made from deer bones and were specially sharpened to create a cutting edge that allowed the wearer to glide across the ice. So far, researchers cannot say for sure for what purposes they were used, for hunting, transport, or something else. In form and material, they are similar to those found in Europe. This suggests the people in the Bronze Age had a huge cultural and technological exchange. Our ancestors traveled thousands of kilometers to exchange goods and technologies. In addition to skates, researchers found wooden fragments of an ancient transport at the excavation site. Among them, 11 solid wheels and more than 30 wooden parts, shafts, axles, and other components. Researchers believe that these are parts of wooden carts that were used in the construction of the tomb. The discovery of such artifacts will help archaeologists better understand how migration took place and how knowledge spread over thousands of kilometers. And the next ancient find on the ground surprised archaeologists. Mysterious footprint on the ground. Another mysterious find was discovered by archaeologists in Israel in the old city of Jerusalem. In the previously buried massive ditch, the researchers found an engraved handprint on the wall. Scientists carried out excavations near one of the main highways of the city. It is believed that the ditch was dug by the Muslim defenders of the city around the 10th century to strengthen the defenses of the city walls. Archaeologists had no idea that one of the most important city streets was built right over a huge ditch. It is interesting that the ditch was carved directly into the rock. Its width is 10 meters and its depth is from 2 to 7 meters. Archaeologists still cannot understand why the ancient builders left a handprint more than 1,000 years ago. Interestingly, this imprint could belong to some kind of ruler or priest, as well as an ordinary builder with a sense of humor. As we all know, ditches were dug in order to fill them with water. In our case, the ditch was never filled with water. Ancient engineers believed that the size of this barrel would be enough to hold or slow down the enemy. Artifacts from different eras in Germany. Searching for objects and treasures with the help of metal detectors is popular all over the world. In some countries, such searches are prohibited. It often happens that newbies are lucky, which happened with one metal detector in northern Germany. He came across an 800-year-old hoard of gold jewelry and silver coins. The treasure was gigantic and tells us about the active trade relations in the area. The hoard consisted of a dozen collection of artifacts, 2 very high-quality gold earring set with semi-precious stones, a gold-plated pseudo-coin brooch, 2 gold-plated rings with stones, a fragment of a ring, a small previously gold-plated perforated disc, a ring brooch, and about 30 silver coins. Archaeologists have been exploring the Schleswig-Holstein region and in particular the city of Haithabu, which has been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for decades. Haithabu was destroyed and abandoned around 1066. Prior to that, it was the second largest Scandinavian city and was important to the Vikings between the 8th and 11th centuries. Someone deliberately buried a bag of jewels in this place. The treasure hunter accidentally found a treasure in a place that had previously been studied several times. Archaeologists immediately arrived at the site and excavated. The gold earrings correspond to the traditions of Byzantine jewelers, and the brooch was made from the gold dinner of the Almohads. Silver coins were minted during the time of the Danish king Waldemar II, which indicates that the treasure was buried at least after 1234. Gold bead over 1,600 years old. And again, excavations in Jerusalem. A gold bead made by a skilled jeweler over 1,600 years ago was discovered in the Amak Tsurim National Park. The find was discovered by 18-year-old Hillel Feidman, who is in the National Service Park. Archaeologists believe that the bead was part of a bracelet or necklace. The soil was taken from a luxurious building that stood on the pilgrimage road. Judging by the finds made here and shards of overseas ceramics, it can be concluded that a very wealthy family lived here. The value of this find is not only in the material of manufacture, but also in the skill of the ancient jeweler. The technology for the production of such jewelry appeared in Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC. Researchers suggest that the age of the bead may be much older than 1,600 years. The jeweler needed great skill in working with the material in order to carefully connect small balls to each other and not flatten them. To do this, it is important to maintain the correct temperature. Similar jewelry has already been found in Jerusalem, but they were made of silver. Travel chests with books. Now any of us can store all our favorite books on a smartphone or in special ebooks. Previously, there was no such possibility, and there was a need to go on a trip with books. For this, people used a travel chest with books. Now around the world, there are only about 100 such chests left. In 2019, Oxford Bodleian Libraries purchased one from a private buyer. The case came from France and was made of wood and leather in the 1400s. It also had metal clasps and hand straps for carrying. Most of the surviving book chests date back to the 1500s, making them among the oldest ever found. The most interesting find was a woodcut attached to the inside of the lid. It was a play called God the Father in Majesty, a draft from a liturgical book in Paris. Overall, the woodcut was incredibly rare. Not only has it been found in its original context and dated to the earliest attempts at printing in Europe, only 4 types are known to exist. 800-year-old mummy is someone's girlfriend. This creepy story took place in Peru. Like many others associated with ancient mummies and terrible rites, 26-year-old Julio Cesar Bermejo sleeps in the same bed with the mummy Juanita, which he inherited from his father. Juanita has lived in this house for over 30 years, but the main disappointment of an older woman lover was awaiting for him further. It was not Juanita, but the real Juan. Quite by chance, the police approached the guy to conduct a routine inspection of things. Julio worked as a courier, and in his refrigerator bag, he carried an ancient mummy with him, claiming that it was his girlfriend. He told the police that he loves her and cares for her, and also that she sleeps with him in the same bed. I probably won't say anything about the guy's mental health. Doctors will tell you about this after they conduct a medical examination. Until then, he will remain in custody. The guy claims that his father brought the mummy home 30 or 40 years ago because the museum did not accept it as a gift. According to the former courier, his family bought it for 2,000 Peruvian sols, at the time a huge amount. Specialists in antiquities have already managed to draw the first conclusions on the mummy. The pre-Hispanic relic is a mummified adult male. He lived presumably in the eastern part of Puno, a region in the Peruvian Andes about 1,300 kilometers southeast of Lima. The man was about 45 years old. The guy said that he just decided to meet with his friends and took the mummy with him because he wanted to show off the girl to his friends. It is difficult to add something to the story, so I propose to move on to the next find of archaeologists. Flush toilet over 2,000 years old. In official world history, it is believed that the first flush toilet was created in England in 1569 by John Harrington for his goddaughter, Queen Elizabeth I. However, a recent find in China wants to rewrite this historical fact. According to this find, the first toilet bowl with a flush appeared in China 1,500–2,000 years ago. In addition to flushing, this toilet had a plumbing that led to a drain pit, apparently located outside the palace. There is no doubt that this luxury item, created even before our era, was used by high-ranking residents of the palace. It is now a toilet in every home, but before it was a privilege only for the elite. An ancient city on the territory of the modern Chinese city of Liang was discovered in the 1980s. From the moment of discovery to this day, massive excavations are on the way there. In 2012, 2 more castle complexes were found, and in 2020, a third was found. At present, only platform foundations remain of the buildings. In addition, archaeologists have unearthed a large semicircular tile known as the Royal Gate tile. It was found in the 4 corners of the foundation. The age of the toilet bowl is between 2,200 and 2,400 years old, which means that the toilet was created in the period from the Warring States to the beginning of the Han Dynasty. According to experts, the find is intriguing as in fact, England is no longer the country where the toilet was created. We are talking about a flush toilet, since the first stone toilets without a flush appeared 6,000 years ago. After discovering the toilet, archaeologists are eager to explore the surrounding soil near the pit. It, in their opinion, can tell about the diet and eating habits of ancient people in China. However, ancient feces have not yet been found. Who ruled the seas 470 million years ago? Nowadays, the seas and oceans hide a huge number of giant living beings. However, 500 million years ago, there were even more creatures, and they were incredible in size. During excavations in southern Morocco, paleontologists discovered giant fossils of 3 swimming arthropods. This discovery made it possible to learn about new sea creatures that lived on our planet 470 million years ago, at the very time when crustaceans and insects 2 meters long lived with them. The Taiwan region in southern Morocco was underwater in those early years, and now it is a desert. In the desert, as you know, excavations are much easier to carry out than deep in the ocean. Scientists have discovered a huge number of ancient remains of arthropods, and now it can be argued that they were at least 2 meters in size and length. The first such creatures appeared on our planet 530–550 million years ago. Scientists have long been trying to understand when they began to dominate the ecosystem of the seas and to study the evolution of modern insects, crustaceans, and other invertebrates. Not far from Taiwan are the world-famous Feijoa shale. They are considered one of the 100 most important geological objects in the world, as they play a crucial role in understanding the evolution of Ordovician animals. In this region, paleontologists often find soft parts of animals, such as internal organs. This allows to study the ancient world very thorough. However, it is much easier to study history when the finds are not so ancient. Mayan statue without a head. In recent years, all finds from Mexico are associated with the construction of the Mayan train railway. I have already told several times in previous videos how many interesting things the builders managed to discover. This time, they found a headless statue the size of a man, 1.65 meters. Archaeologists believe that the limestone statue is Yom Kib, which translates as the god of the phallus, or fertility. It depicts a prisoner who was captured during a military conflict. Prisoners of war with high status were sacrificed, and soldiers, in a simpler way, were used as slaves. The sculpture was found in the ancient city of Oshkintok on the Yucatan Peninsula. Translated from the Mayan language, the name of the city means Stone of the Three Suns. The settlement existed from 250 to 900 AD, was first described in the 16th century. Near the city, a huge cave system was previously discovered where, according to archaeologists, local tribes were hiding from the Spanish colonizers. The last mention of the city was in 1500 AD, most likely at the same time the city ceased to exist. Archaeologists cannot yet name the exact reason why the city died out. Ashkentak is a very important and unique place. There are many engravings and inscriptions that tell us about the events of the past. Thanks to the coding method of the Soviet scientists, which I talked about, we ourselves are able to read about the events and people who were here more than 500 years ago. Visiting the ancient Mayan buildings is one of my goals for the coming years, and when I do, I will definitely tell you and show you. Extinct American lion. A lion in our time reaches a weight of up to 200 kilograms. In ancient times, as we know, everything was much bigger, so in the United States lived a lion which was twice the size of the modern ones. And these were the largest cats that lived in the United States 11,000 years ago. Climate change is bad for historical sites, but sometimes it even helps keep ancient artifacts in good shape. In October of this year, a resident of Mississippi in the river of the same name found a rare fossil of the American lion. This was a jaw of a very rare species. Immediately, an amateur archaeologist thought that he had discovered a large black tooth, but later managed to find out that it was a fragment of the jaw of Panthera atrox. The length of this monster was about 2.5 meters, the height was over a meter, and the weight was about 400 kilograms. These animals became extinct more than 10,000 years ago, along with other representatives of the megafauna. It's hard for me to imagine how such creatures could live in zoos in our time, and to feed such an animal is one hell of a task. Previously, a 19th century ship was found in this place. Experts believe that the jaw was most likely transported on this ship. Due to the drying up of the Mississippi River, archaeologists often find new artifacts. At the moment, this navigable transport route has big problems, but for archaeologists, such situations are, on the contrary, useful, and not only for them. After all, we have the opportunity to know our history and study the ancient world in more detail. While some archaeologists are studying the bottom of the Mississippi, others have discovered a temple at the bottom of the ocean. Temple at the bottom of the ocean. You most likely didn't know, but the Roman Empire had its own Las Vegas, and it was called Baiae. The city was located opposite the Gulf of Pozzuoli. At that time, it was a very fashionable city and attracted the attention of wealthy Romans from all over the Roman Empire. There were many luxurious villas, seaside resorts, and a variety of expensive entertainment. There were villas of all famous emperors: Caesar, Nero, Hadrian. Then life was in full swing here. Now, the resort has turned into an underwater archaeological park. Marine archaeologists have found an old temple at the bottom of the ocean, which is about 2,000 years old. In addition to the temple, a huge area with ancient structures was discovered. Along the 2-kilometer coastline, mosaics, statues, and almost all buildings were well preserved. Mikhail Stefanilo and his colleagues have been studying the area since 2021. They want to create a detailed map of the area and especially to study the ancient temple. The construction of the temple was carried out not only by local residents, but also by immigrants from Central Asia. In addition to them, Nabatean merchants took part in the construction. These are the people who lived in northern Arabia and the southern Levant. Historians found the first evidence of the Nabatean temple in the inscriptions of the 18th century. All these finds were made possible thanks to archaeologists and divers. We dealt with the river, the seas, and oceans too. Now let's move on to studying the pyramids at the bottom of the lake. Mysterious stone pyramids. For the first time, this find was talked about in 2015, and in my first videos on the channel, I most likely even talked about it. Then, at the bottom of Lake Constance, located on the border of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, archaeologists found a chain of 170 stone pyramids. They formed a 20-kilometer strip running parallel to the lakeshore 200 meters from it. Each pyramid had a diameter of 30 meters and a height of about 2. The pyramids are located on a layer of lacustrine deposits formed after the retreat of the Rhine Glacier more than 10,000 years ago. Now, archaeologists have more modern equipment to study ancient objects, especially those located in hard-to-reach places. With the help of an excavator, they excavated one of the pyramids to get to the stone layer. There, they also found wood with traces of primitive processing. Thanks to this wood, archaeologists managed to somehow date the pyramids. So far, the use of the pyramids by ancient people has several options. These could be places of worship or some kind of crypts for the burial of people, but perhaps everything is much simpler. These were ancient houses or fish traps. The team of archaeologists plans to return to Lake Constance soon to investigate the next stone pyramid. Perhaps this will provide additional information for dating and explaining the functions of the mysterious monuments. We know that archaeologists, quite by accident, can find something insignificant there that can fully explain the origin of the ancient pyramids. Enough underwater finds, let's better deal with the marriage scam in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian scam. Archaeologists have found in Egypt one interesting document about a marriage scam. This papyrus is over 2,000 years old. Just imagine, we can now find out what kind of scams men were capable of in relation to their lovers in ancient Egypt. The manuscript is a complaint of the deceived bride Philomena to King Ptolemy with a request to punish Numenius, who promised to marry. As stated in the text, instead of a wedding, a man simply appropriated the dower of his former lover. As you can see, the history of marriage scams has very long roots. Even then, people used legal tricks and engaged in fraud. So far, we know only about one such case, which has been documented, and how many of them happened in those years, we can only guess. The document was found in Deir el-Banat necropolis in the Fayoum oasis. For almost 1,000 years, people were buried here from the 4th century BC to the time of Byzantine Egypt. The manuscript was buried as a material for ritual decorations. The thing is that not everyone could afford to put precious stones and metals in burial places. Therefore, the ancient Egyptians resorted to trickery. They made necklaces from pressed pieces of papyrus, which then they used as an offering to the afterlife. Papyrus was taken most often scribbled. The next find will also be associated with a mass grave. Burial under the supermarket. The next creepy find was discovered last year. In the medieval Welsh town, archaeologist Andrew Snodbrook opened a window into the past. A mass grave of people was found under an old supermarket, a third of which were children. A total of 307 bodies were found buried in Haverfordwest. Archaeologists have a certain rule: out of respect for the dead, they did not take a single photograph. At least a third of the remains were children, indicating an infant mortality rate of 50–70% in the mid-200s. Unfortunately, this is not unusual. However, it is not the bones themselves that excite the archaeologists most of all. On the one hand, these are the bodies of dead people. On the other hand, the study of the burial will help to understand what was happening at that time, what people got sick with, what caused such mortality among children, and most importantly, who buried them here. 7 burials were in a pit of lined stones. Such accuracy of the burial could be due to the high status of the dead, or these were the first burials in this place. In one place of the cemetery, there was a small group of graves, which indicated that either representatives of one wealthy family or monarchs lay here. All bones will go to the laboratory for detailed study. DNA will be taken from them and all the necessary tests will be carried out. Scientists will try to study the relationship of the buried with each other and understand what happened around 1246 in Haverfordwest. One of the skeletons was found with horribly crooked legs and rotten teeth. This corresponds to the way the Dominican monks lived and worked. Dominicans, or black monks, have always been among the people. They preached, prayed, and most importantly, cared for the poor and the sick. It is for this reason that in the old age, they looked very exhausted and unkempt. After all, they gave all their strength throughout their lives to those in need. Archaeologists will not put all the discovered bones on public display. They will rebury them on consecrated ground, which will be as close as possible to Haverfordwest. Human skull over 1 million years old. The reality of such finds is confirmed by archaeologists from China. It was there that similar ancient remains of humanoids have been repeatedly found. In our case, the reliability is confirmed by Émile Vialet, a researcher from the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. He confirmed that the skull was perfectly preserved and its age is about 1 million years. Chinese archaeologists have established that the skull belongs to the archaic species of man Homo erectus. In addition to the skull of Homo erectus, animal fossils have been found. Based on all the findings, scientists were able to date the ancient artifacts as accurately as possible. People lived in Yunnan from 1.1 million to 800,000 years ago. Experts identified the forehead, eye sockets, and cheekbones of the skull. It's hard to believe, but we can now see the fossil of a man who lived on our planet more than 1 million years ago. But why have so few fossils been found? Or are we not told about all the finds? Why are some ancient human and animal remains preserved while others turned to dust? In the next video, I will definitely try to answer these questions. In the meantime, I will talk about a unique gold ring from ancient Egypt. Golden ring with the inscription Lady of the Earth. The inscription Lady of the Earth with the image of the god of fun Bes was found on gold rings. Such a find was made by archaeologists from the Australian University in the ancient Egyptian burial of the city of Akhenaten. The age of the burial is approximately 3,300 years. Engraved on one of the rings, Bes was the god of fun and the protector of women in labor. He is depicted on the ring as a dwarf. In addition to the rings, a necklace of gold petals was found. On one of the rings was the inscription Lady of the Earth. Archaeologists are not yet in a hurry to name the possible name of the owner of this ring. In the coming month, they plan to collect all the finds together and study them in detail. Akhenaten was built by Pharaoh Akhenaten, who was trying to change the polytheistic religion of Egypt. He intended to make Aten, the god of the solar disk, the main god. He moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to Akhenaten. But soon after the death of Akhenaten, the new city was abandoned and religious reforms were cancelled by his son Tutankhamun. All artifacts found in Akhenaten and now Amarna are of great value among archaeologists. In the last video, I talked about how the Egyptian authorities are trying to hide the history of the ancient world and sell artifacts to wealthy collectors. Discovery near Stonehenge. One and the same find can be studied for centuries. Over time, archaeologists discover interconnected finds, study ancient texts, or new technologies emerge for more detailed study. This happened with the ancient tools that were discovered in 1802 near Stonehenge. These were millennial axes and polished stones. They revealed tiny traces of gold. Scientists have re-examined the axes and stones and found that it was a set of an ancient jeweler 4,000 years old. Repeated microscopic analysis of the axes and shaped cobblestones found in the tomb revealed tiny traces of gold and signs of wear, indicating that they were used by a skilled craftsman to forge and smoothen gold plates. A Bronze Age mound was excavated in 1802 near Upton Lovell in Wiltshire. Archaeologists were interested in a large number of pierced animal bones, which then they mistook for the costume of an ancient shaman. However, flint bows, 2 broken axes, and an owl made of copper alloy were found nearby, which did not attract much attention from archaeologists. Bones with holes seemed to scientists a more interesting find. Thanks to microscopic analysis, scientists were able to see tiny traces of gold on the stones, which was identical in composition to the gold of those items. These stones were used to level and polish the precious metal. According to archaeologists, the jeweler used these tools to make valuable artifacts in which objects made of jet, amber, or wood were covered with thin sheets of gold. Museums have similar decorations that have survived from the Bronze Age. Archaeologists speculate that flint bowls may have been used to mix resin and glue, and with an awl, a jeweler could create holes and patterns. So after a while, scientists were able to learn more about the find discovered 200 years ago. The oldest shipyard. Underwater archaeologists from the Maritime Archaeology Trust never cease to delight us with new finds. This time they managed to find what is probably the oldest shipyard in the world. According to preliminary estimates, it is 8,000 years old. Off the coast of the Isle of Wight, deep underwater, archaeologists have found a man-made wooden shipyard that was built by Stone Age people. The shipyard did not build yachts or aircraft carriers. Stone Age people built fishing boats on it. Previously, the age of the oldest shipyard was 5,500 years old, and this shipyard used technologies from the future, so to speak. This confirms the fact that either people in antiquity had much more knowledge than we think, or modern dating methods do not work at all. The oldest shipyard used advanced wood processing technology. Therefore, this object is very important for maritime archaeology and understanding the development of our civilization. The shipyard was discovered at a depth of 11 meters, and 8,000 years ago, there was dry land and the area was covered with vegetation. In fact, the shipyard was discovered back in 2005, but only now has technology made it possible to create a three-dimensional model of the structure for further study. It's hard to imagine, but it's a fact. People in the Stone Age boats using their own shipyard for this. This is what kind of technology and knowledge people had in antiquity. I am sure that before it would be very difficult for them to move from the Isle of Wight to the island of Taiwan, and we can do it in a matter of seconds. Ancient tiny people in Taiwan. Taiwan is a very interesting island located 130–220 kilometers east of China. The history of Taiwan's indigenous Austronesians goes back 5,000 years, but according to the legends and stories of local residents in the villages, before the Austronesians, another equally interesting civilization lived here. They were often referred to as pygmies, or tiny people. They had dark skin and curly hair, and their most distinguishing feature was, as you might have guessed, their tiny stature. All information about them was based only on fables and legends. But recently, a very important event happened. In early October of this year, scientists proved the existence of tiny humans in Taiwan. The journal World Archaeology published an article claiming that archaeologists in a cave in southeastern Taiwan have found the remains of ancient people who belong to Negritos. This ethnic group still lives in Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, and the Andaman Islands. The term Negritos is a direct Spanish translation meaning little black and is the widely accepted scientific and historical name for this ethnic group. The Negritos are the first descendants of the first people of Sundaland. For scientists, the study of these remains is very important since these people most likely migrated from Africa. After conducting research, scientists determined that the possible height of tiny people was 138 centimeters. The first people arrived on the island 30,000 years ago, when there was a land corridor between mainland China and Taiwan. But 10,000 years ago, the corridor went underwater. The legend of the Negritos people in Taiwan is quite interesting. Of the ethnic groups, about half of the Austronesians saw the Negritos as enemies, while the other half saw them as allies, neutrals, or ancestors. However, one ethnic group, the Saisiid, had a surprisingly difficult relationship with the Negritos. The Saisiid is a small population that still exists in Taiwan. They have a tradition called Pa Tai, a ritual dedicated to honoring short people. As the legend says, ancient Saisiids and little Tai once lived nearby. The Tai taught their neighbors medicine, singing, dancing, and other cultural traditions. However, the Tai men harassed the Saisiid women. After that, the Saisiids became angry and killed almost all the Tai people. After this event, a terrible famine evaded them and they thought that they were punished by the vengeful spirit of the pygmies. Since then, they began to conduct the Pa Tai ceremony, in which they asked for forgiveness for the sins of their ancestors. Since then, the tiny people ceased to exist. And long before the existence of the human race, our planet was inhabited by giant monsters, and a little boy found a tooth of one such giant on the shore. A unique find of a young paleontologist. Just like that, you can come with your family to South Carolina, go to the beach and find something very ancient that makes you shudder. A little boy of 8 years old walking on the beach and digging in the mud found a large fossilized tooth of an ancient shark. Shark tooth is more than 12 centimeters long, which is considered a very large specimen. It's even hard to imagine what this monster looked like 20 million years ago, having more than one such tooth in its mouth and not even 100. An adult individual of the monster had about 300 teeth in its mouth, and each is about 8-15 centimeters in size. And now, in our time, a little boy just holds this tooth in his hands. It causes shock and admiration at the same time. Paleontologists from all over the world have already written their congratulations to the boy, because even for specialists, a find of this kind is a rare occurrence. Otodus angustidens is a species of megatooth shark that lived during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs, approximately 32 to 22 million years ago. Sharks have been known to grow to at least 10 meters in length. These sharks are related to the Otodus megalodon, another extinct giant-toothed shark. That is, you understand that there were many such sharks in ancient times, and what prevents them now from swimming deep in the ocean farther from a reasonable person? There is already a lot of information about megalodons on YouTube, but I still remind you that the length of this shark reached 20 meters, and the size of the largest living whale is 33 meters. However, whales are not predators, and this creature did not mind eating any living organism on our planet. Let's take a break from teeth for a bit and move to Mexico. 2 2,500-year-old Olmec reliefs. The Olmecs are the oldest civilization in Mesoamerica. To be precise, this is the oldest civilization that we know about, and to be even more precise, we know very little about them. The heyday of their civilization was from about 1600 to 400 BC. They lived along the Gulf of Mexico, where the states of Tabasco and Veracruz are now located. Archaeologists themselves do not even know how these people called themselves, though the word Olmec is a Nahuatl word, Aztec language, and means rubber people. These people had ritual bloodletting. They loved to play with the bowl and drink chocolate, and also they were the ancestors of the Maya, also about which the scientific world knows much more. And the Olmecs carved giant stone heads from volcanic rocks. This became their hallmark. Old buildings discovered by archaeologists were deliberately destroyed. That is, more than 2,000 years ago, someone deliberately tried to wipe out a whole people with all the buildings from the face of the earth. Recently, archaeologists have discovered Olmec reliefs that were made of limestone. They were about 1.5 meters in diameter and weighed 700 kilograms. Stone reliefs have been found in the municipality of Tennessee in Tabasco in southeastern Mexico. It is assumed that the local Olmec rulers are depicted on the reliefs during the performance of ritual ceremonies. Perhaps these people are in a position that reduces the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain, which causes a trance-like state. From the stone heads of the rulers of Mesoamerica, we will move to Africa, where a pink stone sarcophagus awaits us. Pink Treasure Keeper's Sarcophagus. Dream find. That's what archaeologists called the sarcophagus, which they managed to find near Cairo. As you know, very important people of ancient Egypt were kept in sarcophaguses. It seems to me that the ancient Egyptians buried a high-ranking nobleman 3,300 years ago, clearly not so that we can now get him out of the tomb and study him with the help of modern equipment. But how else can we study the history of our ancestors if the papyruses contain far from all the information about the life of the pharaohs? Scientists have already found out that the pink sarcophagus belonged to Ptah Mvaya, who served as the head of the treasury under Ramses the Great. On all sides, the sarcophagus is decorated with hieroglyphs and various titles. It lay at a depth of 10 meters for more than 3,000 years, and now looks like it did on the first day. Historians have little data on who ruled Egypt after Tutankhamun. Therefore, every find is important. The pink sarcophagus indicates that the person buried in it was close to the king and played a very important role in the state administration of that time. If it's easy to explain to you in modern language, the Ptah Maya in the modern world would be the Minister of Finance. To get to the tomb, archaeologists had to dig up and take out tons of sand, and this was only the first level of the tomb, located next to the pyramid of King Unas. Under the sand, they found masonry, and in order to further dive to the second level of the tomb, the masonry had to be strengthened. Through a small hole in the floor, they descended to the second level of the tomb where the sarcophagus was located. Archaeologists descended in a metal basket, lowering and raising themselves on their own. It would seem that with such technologies in the 21st century, excavations have to be carried out in the same way as 200 years ago. The condition of the sarcophagus was good, but the broken cover indicated the presence of marauders here. Usually different people were reburied in sarcophaguses, but in our case, the sarcophagus belonged to its first owner. This is confirmed by the hieroglyphs and titles found in the sarcophagus. Professor Al-Agwiz's team will now fully examine the sarcophagus to uncover the full life story of Ptah Maya. And around the same time, in the Marianas, people lured octopuses. Ancient octopus bait. 3,500 years ago in the Marianas, people loved to eat octopuses. And to catch these amazing creatures, they used small cuts and drilled pieces of cowrie shells. This is a type of sea snail that octopuses really like. The shells were fastened with a small stone sinker with grooves. This tradition originated here 3,500 years ago and lasted until about 1000 AD. Similar finds have been found on other Pacific islands. This suggests that ancient people shared their knowledge of fishing and hunting among themselves, even though they were separated by hundreds and thousands of kilometers. At the moment, it is these octopus baits that are considered the most ancient on the planet. This tells us that this type of food resource was important enough for them that they invented something very special to catch octopuses. It is difficult to say what made up the bulk of their diet, but if we take another experience in archaeology, we can say that for the ancient people of the Mariana Islands, octopuses were considered traditional food. If everything is clear with seafood, then it's completely incomprehensible what kind of strange pits were found in Peru. Thousands of strange holes in Peru. On the territory of Peru, archaeologists find hundreds and even thousands of artifacts and various finds that defy explanation. I will be honest, many of these finds are fakes, and the creators of these finds simply make money on gullible people. In the Pisco Valley, archaeologists have discovered thousands of holes. The Peruvians themselves call them differently: Monte Sierp, which means snake mountain, and Cerro Veruela, which literally translates as smallpox hill, or simply a strip of holes. But the most unusual names came up on the net. They're called an incubator for alien acts. These pits are located in very inaccessible place, so there are few scientists who are able to visit here. From this, it is still impossible to explain the origin of holes. They were first seen flying by plane in the 30s of the last century. In the 50s, the first expedition of scientists set off here, which managed to calculate the size and number of holes. The strip of holes stretched for 1.5 kilometers, and the width of the strip was from 14 to 20 meters. But the number of holes shocked the researchers. There were more than 5,000 of them. The first idea that scientists came up with was an ancient mass grave. That is why there are more questions. Pits from 0.5 meter to 1 meter deep. Nearby there are no traces of a person, artifacts of ancient civilizations, nothing at all that could give at least some clue to explain this place. Archaeologists have different theories about the origin of the pits, but most of them are pseudoscientific. One thing is known for sure, that these pits are at least hundreds of years old, and most likely they were created by people. You can write in the comments your assumptions for what they could be used in the past. The rarest mosaic in Syria. Archaeologists have managed to find an ancient mosaic that depicts the Trojan War. The find is about 1,600 years old and very well preserved. found it in northern Syria. Nothing like it had been found before. On the Mosaic, you can see the battle of ancient Greek warriors and Amazons under the walls of Troy. You can even see the names of the commanders who were armed with swords and shields. Most likely they were famous warriors of those times. The area of this work of art is 120 square meters, and it adorned the floor of an ancient Roman bath. The Trojan War took place between the ancient Greeks and the inhabitants of Troy around the 12th or 13th century BC. The uniqueness of this mosaic lies in the depiction of Amazon women who fought on the side of Troy. The Amazons were, in ancient Greek and Roman mythology, the demigod Heracles killed Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, in one of his 12 labors. The Trojan battle lasted 10 years. Looking back, 10 years doesn't seem like a lot of time, but if you bring that figure to our time, it sends shivers all over your body. But back to history. For 9 years, the Greeks destroyed the nearby cities and villages, but the city of Troy itself was too tough for them. This was a fortress that could not be captured, but the Greeks came up with a trick that everyone knows about in our time. The most interesting thing is that not the slightest wooden pieces of this giant horse have been found so far. Therefore, for now, the story of the Trojan horse can be considered a legend. Representatives of the Nabu Museum hope that excavations in ancient Eraston will continue. According to them, the city is full of heritage monuments and artifacts. No serious archaeological excavations have been carried out in this place yet, so we can only guess how many more amazing finds await us in the future. 600-year-old kitchen. Novi Jissen was supposedly founded at the end of the 13th century at the crossroads of trade routes from Poland and Silesia to the Czech Republic and Hungary. The first written mention of Novi Jissen dates back to 1313, when King Johann of Luxembourg granted him the first city privileges, the right to collect customs fees and duties. Archaeologists suggest that the city used to have a predominantly wooden building, but admit that little is known about the medieval settlement. Medieval houses were built of wood and clay, but they were gradually replaced with brick structures. This was especially active in the New Age. The stone foundations of an older building were found under the floor of the courtyard room at the rear of the layout of the current house. Throughout the area bounded by these foundations, the remains of a charred wooden floor have been preserved. It was a log house built on a stone foundation. Archaeologists date it to the beginning of the 15th century. The house is located on the northern side of the city walls of the historical center, which indicates that it most likely belonged to a burgher family, a representative of the medieval bourgeoisie. In the southwest corner of the room, archaeologists found the well-preserved remains of a brick oven with a hearth, as well as a complete set of kitchen utensils with a wooden cooking spoon. They mark the perfect condition of the medieval utensils. The ceramic pots are intact and with original lids. It looks like they were washed and left to dry on the hearth. Among the artifacts, glass rings were found that could be part of women's necklace, a spring lock for a door or chest, and an iron pitchfork with 3 teeth. The finds are now undergoing the process of conservation, after which they will be stored in the Novoichinsk Museum. 3-toed extraterrestrial mummies. A few years ago, a new find was made in Peru, which was a very strange extraterrestrial mummy, which at the end of the expedition was nicknamed Maria. 5 mummies have been found, 1 female and 4 male, and according to experts, they are very similar to humans, but too different to have any relationship with us. They were found in a tomb near the Peruvian Nazca lines, which is already a warning sign that we are dealing with aliens, but the mummies also have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which could mean that they are human after all. They date back to the 5th century AD, a full millennium before the Europeans discovered America. Konstantin KirTop and Natalia Zaluzhная collected tissue samples and brought them to St. Petersburg for analysis. If KirTop believes that this was a race of people who developed much faster than the rest, then Zaluzhная is sure that it was still a race of aliens. X-rays and computed tomography also show that Maria has a completely different structure of the ribs than we do. It is shaped like a keel at the top, and despite the fact that the cage protects the internal organs of the creature in the same way as ours, for this it had several semicircular ribs. In the end, they came to the conclusion that these two could not possibly be our relatives. These mummies represent a race of aliens that lived among us in ancient times, and that's a fact. Terrible child sacrifice. Archaeologists find evidence of human sacrifice in all corners of the globe. But what they saw in the north of Peru in the vicinity of the ancient capital of the Chimu people, Chan, shocked even experienced researchers. The remains of 269 children with traces of cut wounds on the sternum and ribs. Who and why committed this terrible murder? In total, the remains of 269 children from 5 to 14 years old and 3 adults are found in 2 adjacent graves. They all perished more than 500 years ago in the course of carefully thought out sacrifices. Perhaps such rituals neither before nor since have known the history of the world. In 2011, the owner of a local pizzeria shared surprising news. His children and local dogs began to find human bones sticking out of the sand in a nearby vacant lot. He begged the archaeologists to find out what was the matter. At first, Prito thought it was just a forgotten cemetery, but having unearthed the remains of several children wrapped in shrouds and received their radiocarbon dates 1400-1450, the archaeologists realized that he had stumbled upon a large-scale and terrible burial. It is not so easy to resurrect the events in Huayna Chiquito, mainly because scientists know very little about the Chimu culture. Light on the mystery of Huayna Chiquito sheds hardened silt in which the victims were buried. Thick layers of silt indicate prolonged heavy rains. The people of Chan depended on well-established irrigation systems and coastal fishing, but the rise in sea temperature and heavy rains caused by this climatic phenomena could shake both the political and economic foundations of the Chimu Empire. Perhaps the priests and chieftains decided to perform a mass sacrifice in a desperate attempt to plead with the gods to stop the flood and the famine. Jane Eva Baxter, an anthropologist at DePaul University in Chicago, supports the hypothesis that in the eyes of the Chimu, children could be one of the most valuable gifts that could be presented to the gods. The burial of the woman vampire. In the practice of archaeologists, sometimes there are deviant burials. They stand out due to the funeral rite that differs from the generally accepted in this culture. So, the dead could be buried outside the cemetery or deprived of some part of the body. The appearance of deviant burials could be influenced by many reasons, related both to the belief system and to the circumstances of life and death of people buried in an unusual manner. One of the categories of non-standard burials are the graves of the so-called vampires. Archaeologists believe that such burials contain the remains of people who were feared by others. They were afraid that the deceased would rise from their graves. To prevent this from happening, the dead were put stones in their mouth, mutilated and even nailed to the ground. In addition, the placement of sickles and scythe on the neck of abdomen was practiced. They could appoint a vampire for an unusual appearance, witchcraft, suicide, or the first victims of epidemics. Polish archaeologists from the Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun, led by Professor Dariusz Polinsky, carried out excavations near the city of Bydgoszcz, where in 2005-2009 an early medieval necropolis was explored, the burials of which contained valuable inventory. This year, however, scientists have focused their attention on a neighboring 17th century burial complex damaged by agricultural work. In one of the burials, archaeologists discovered the remains of a vampire woman. An iron sickle lay around her neck, and a padlock was placed on the big toe of her left foot. At the same time, the remains of a silk headdress have been preserved on the skull of this woman, which may indicate her rather high status, since in the 17th century it was a very expensive commodity. Perhaps the reason why the locals buried her in such an unusual way lies in the non-standard appearance of the woman. Her front tooth protruded forward. Lady Rye. Lady Rye is one of the oldest known mummies discovered in Egypt. She was discovered in 1881, and researchers estimate she was in her 30s or 40s when she died around 1530 BC. From the writings left about Lady Rye, we know that she was the nurse of Queen Amos Nefertari, the first queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. The mummified body of Amos in Hapi, Amos Nefertari's aunt, was found in Lady Rye's outer coffin. In 2009, researchers performed a CT scan on Lady Rye's body and found that she had atherosclerosis. She is the oldest known mummy with the disease, and several other Egyptian mummies also show signs of atherosclerosis. Woman buried with baby in her arms. In the area of the city of Nieuwegein, Netherlands, archaeologists have discovered many monuments of the Neolithic culture of the Zwijfterband. Ancient pastoralists settled along river banks in what is now the Netherlands between 5300 and 3400 BC. About 136,000 artifacts of this culture were discovered by experts under a 2-meter layer of peat and clay in the business park Het Klooster. During the excavations, archaeologists discovered 4 skeletons, removed them together with the deposits in a single block, and delivered them to the Leiden Archaeological Laboratory for research. One of the skeletons belonged to a young woman, 20-30 years old, who died about 6,000 years ago. Initially, experts considered the burial to be single. The pose of the skeleton seemed strange. The right arm was bent at an angle of 90 degrees, which is not typical for the burials of this culture. Only after a thorough analysis, experts found a tiny skeleton of an infant in the area of the hand, collarbones, skull, long bones, and a jaw with milk teeth. Judging by the development of the teeth, the child was about 3 months old at the time of death. The find turned out to be the oldest children's burial in the Netherlands. In the grave itself, besides the bones, there are no artifacts, but pieces of deer antlers and clay pots were found nearby. DNA analysis conducted in 2019 showed that the child was a girl, while the woman turned out to be the mother of the baby. Ships of Caligula. The ships of Emperor Caligula, built in the 1st century AD, were not intended for sea battles or travel. They were magnificent pleasure houses adorned with gold and precious stones. The largest ships of antiquity sailed on a small mountain lake and sank under unclear circumstances. The master of pleasure, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, is a man better known in history by his nickname Caligula, Boot. Caligula ruled the Roman Empire from 37 to 41 AD, and for 4 years of power, he was remembered by posterity as one of the most odious rulers of the great power. As if trying to find the limits of human capabilities and test the strength of the empire's budget, the monarch carried out the most incredible and expensive projects. Huge ships launched into the water in the volcanic caldera of Lake Nemi have become one of such fantastic creations. We are talking about 2 rowing galleys. One of them served as a temple to the goddess of the forest Diana. The other was supposedly a pleasure palace. The largest ship reached 73 meters in length and 24 meters in width. The smaller vessel, 70 meters long and 20 wide, was not equipped with oars. It was pulled in tow. For comparison, the British steamer Titanic, famous for the largest ship of the early 19th century, reached 270 meters in length and 28 meters in width. Caligula's galleys were inferior in parameters to the Titanic, but they sailed on a lake with a diameter of no more than 1,000 meters. For their time, they were giants splashing in a puddle. beautiful. But something else was interesting. Flowering gardens were laid out on the ships, on which fruit trees branched, flowers were fragrant, and grapes hung down. There were also baths, pools, a revolving stage, and palaces with rooms for slaves and guests. Communications included plumbing with cold and hot water, as well as warm floors. Of course, the entire interior was skillfully decorated with heads of wild animals, patterns, and noble metal. Jewels glittered on the oars. The roofs of the palace and the temple, cast gold in the sun, stood on marble columns and covered amazingly beautiful mosaic floor. Statues stood here and there, bas-reliefs and paintings adorned the walls. The stage, which consisted of revolving platforms, was of amazing beauty and functionality. Their design used a ball-bearing system, which was reinvented only towards the end of the 19th century. And all this splendor existed 2,000 years ago. One can only guess and envy what holidays Caligula celebrated there. The skeletons of the ships, which are remarkably preserved at the bottom of the lake thanks to the solidity of the ancient Romans, were exhibited in the museum. The museum was destroyed in 1944 either by the Germans or by the Americans. Historians disagree. However, not all is lost. According to the researchers, most likely another ship rests at the bottom of the lake, reaching a length of 122 meters. It seems that the main sensations are still ahead of us. Active Girl. The Active Girl is a famous Danish mummy who was buried in a well-preserved coffin discovered in 1921. Although the tree-trunk coffin was well preserved, the girl's bones were not preserved, only her clothes, hair, nails, and some teeth were in good condition. Also inside her coffin were the cremated remains of a child who was about 5 or 6 years old. Historians believe that the young lady was a priestess of the Scandinavian cult of the sun because of the spiral symbols on her belt. Later, research showed that the girl was not from Denmark but from the Black Forest in Germany. It is believed that she may have married a chieftain in Denmark to form a strategic alliance. The oldest natural mummy on the planet. The mummy was found in the Spirit Cave in Nevada in 1940. Despite the fact that the man died more than 10,600 years ago, his mummy is perfectly preserved. It is interesting that the body was wrapped in a sheet and a reed mat, and moccasins were preserved on the feet of the deceased. Previous analyses have shown that the remains belong to a man who died at the age of 40. Thanks to comfortable conditions, the mummy has almost completely survived to this day. The whole upper part of the skull, the skin on the back and shoulders, a bunch of dark hair in the back of the head. Next to the man, scientists found 70 different items, including knives, baskets, and animal bones. They also found 2 woolen bags filled with ashes and bones of cremated people. Litigation about the origin of the mummy began in 1996 when scientists conducted the first radiocarbon analysis, which showed that the age of the mummy is 9,400 years. Around the same time, representatives of the Shoshone tribe, a North American group of Indian tribes who speak the languages of the Ute Aztecan language family, declared that the mummy belonged to them. The Shoshone demanded that the remains be handed over immediately under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, but the scientists did not accept the request, since the mummies belonging to any people was not established. Then the long legal proceedings began, which lasted almost 20 years. Some scientists did not want to give away the remains to the tribe, as the mummy occupied a place of honor in the museum and told a lot about the ancient inhabitants of North America. 2 years ago, representatives of the Shoshone tribe gave specialists permission to conduct the first genetic analysis of the mummy. The analysis showed that the remains of the man are indeed of American origin. Scientists explained that this mummy was extremely important for the tribe, since the Cave of Spirits has a sacred meaning for them. The mummy has now been officially handed over to the tribe. Bronze plate in the shape of a hand. Let's start with the find discovered in Worms, Spain. Archaeologists have begun excavations of the hill where the walls of the medieval castle still stand. Near the fortification, they discovered the remains of a 2,000-year-old settlement. The Suetorian Wars took place here, and last year, at the site of destruction, archaeologists discovered a unique bronze plate in the shape of a hand, and the dimensions of the plate were similar to the palm of a person, 14.5 centimeters. After conducting a study in the laboratory, scientists examined strange inscriptions divided into 4 lines. There were 40 symbols in total. When the bronze plate was first discovered, it was mistaken for part of the helmet. At first, neither ornaments nor symbols were visible. After a detailed analysis, the scientists found out the composition of the plate. It is 53% tin, 41% copper, and 2% lead. What was considered the norm for those times? A small notch was drilled in the metal hand for hanging on the front door of the house as a talisman. The first word was Sorionako, which is easily translated into the modern Basque word Zoronako, meaning good luck or good omen. The rest of the inscription has not yet been deciphered. This seemingly primitive artifact can actually be attributed to an important archaeological and linguistic discovery. Scientists are sure that people spoke the Bak language more than 2,000 years ago. If this find did not surprise you, then the next one will definitely amaze you. Drugs during the sacrifice. South America's interest in the ancient world is not inferior even to Egypt. The ancient people living here did truly terrifying things. This time, scientists from the USA, Peru, and Poland have found a terrible proof. After conducting a lot of research to accurately verify their guesses, they determined that the ancient Incas before the sacrifices drugged children. In this way, they calmed them before the ritual, which was watched by hundreds and thousands of people, and most likely the parents of their children watched this as well. Archaeologists discovered the remains of 2 children in the area of the Ampata volcano in Peru, and based on their hair and nails, scientists found a small amount of cocaine and the ayahuasca hallucinogen, which is very developed in this region today. At the same time, they are sure that 500 years ago, the Incas used ayahuasca not as a hallucinogen but to calm children. Scientists believe that the children were well aware of what awaited them in the near future, and voluntarily they would not have agreed to the sacrifices. To do this, the shamans gave them drugs for several weeks, constantly increasing the dosage. This is confirmed by the Spanish colonialists who witnessed this terrible ritual. They wrote that they saw how people were brought to the sacrificial ceremony and they behaved completely calmly, as if they had been preparing for this all their lives. The Capacocha ritual was a common practice among the ancient Incas. It was only held on special occasions. A victory battle or the birth of a royal son was considered a special occasion. What now seems like something incredible, literally 500-600 years ago was considered common. To relieve some tension, I will tell you about one of the oldest trading settlements in Oman. Ancient trading settlement. On the western coast of the Arabian Peninsula in Dawa, there was a complex of 5 early Bronze Age sites. Archaeologists have been excavating here for 10 years, and during this time, they managed to discover a lot of valuable and interesting finds. Some of them confirmed that an ancient trading settlement was located on this site, and according to a number of analyses, it is the oldest in the world. Archaeological finds include building floor plans, industrial infrastructure, and silver jewelry that tell new stories of ancient trade. The settlement dates back to el-Nar, which flourished from about 2600 to 2000 BC. Archaeologists have excavated Dawa stone buildings, including warehouses, industrial copper processing centers, administrative offices, and religious houses. All structures are the first of their kind since prehistoric times found in Oman. Researchers found a mass grave nearby. Many local and important pottery and soapstone were found with the remains. For the production of jewelry, silver was delivered from the territory of modern Turkey. This proves that people in Bronze Age were very smart and technologically advanced. More than 4,000 years ago, there were settlements on our planet that were in no way inferior to modern states. Even then, people were thinking hundreds of years ahead, erecting structures and building supply chains. And a little closer to our time in ancient Egypt, people were stigmatized. How people were stigmatized. Now you will not surprise anyone with a tattoo on the body, and many tattoos look like a real work of art, although the attitude towards them is completely different for everyone. Even animals today are stigmatized, which indicates their belonging, but in ancient Egypt, tattoos were done to people not at all for the sake of beauty. For a long time, humane researchers wanted to believe that in ancient times only cattle were branded. Historians refused to believe that people were stigmatized to indicate their belonging to a particular slave owner. It sounds too animalistic. That just an exhibit in the British Museum indicates that in ancient Egypt, people were still branded without their consent. The ancient stamps located in the museum are too small for cattle, and there is no point in branding small animals. And as history shows, people were perfect for this. In ancient texts, there were references to the branding of slaves and prisoners of war in Egypt. For example, on the carving of Medinet Habu, dating back to 1185 BC found in Luxor, scientists examined red-hot small seals. They were carried in a portable heater. The citizens of Egypt should not have worried, usually nothing threatened them, but foreign slaves and soldiers in a mandatory manner received the stigma with a red-hot seal. The slave-holding practice in ancient Egypt was similar to serfdom, when the land was sold together with the peasants. Land that consistently yields a crop was sold along with the people who cultivated it, and people lived with this shameful stigma all their lives. Human skull from Petrolana Cave. This unique discovery of a human skull, made in the middle of the last century, has already been forgotten by many. But its discovery can significantly shape the history of the origin of man. Or maybe this is again the same find that historians are trying to turn a blind eye to, so as not to rewrite our history. An interesting incident occurred in 1959 in Greece, where a group of enthusiasts discovered a cave near the village of Petrolana. In addition to ancient stalactites, many interesting finds were found in the cave, confirming the presence of a person here. These are the remains of ancient wood, the wool of extinct animals and tools, but this one find looked pretty creepy and was non-standard. The most important find in the cave was a skull embedded in the rock. Such a find should have been made public. However, Aris Pelianus intervened in this story, and one time he dealt with the topic, the origin of the Greeks. For many, his writings have been controversial and historians have dismissed his evidence. As soon as the doctor found out about the Petrolanian man, as the skull embedded in the rock was called, he immediately went to study it. After analyzing the object, it was possible to prove that this individual really developed separately in Europe and his relatives did not come from Africa. Many scientists immediately challenged the opinion of Aris Pelianus, stating that the skull is about 60,000 and not 750,000 years old, as the doctor claims. However, there was one thing. Scientists conducted a stratigraphic analysis of the cave and deposits, as well as 2 more skeletons found later, and we are talking about a figure of about 700,000 years. Researchers who have been working on studying the skull have confirmed that it is different from Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and this contradicts the African theory of the origin of man. There was a large hole in the walls of the Petrolana cave, where various animals fell over the years. A huge mountain of bones and signs of 20 cultural layers were found at this place. In 2012, the doctor was attacked and beaten. He was threatened with death if he continued to speak publicly about his research. And if all this is true, then there is an opinion that we all did not come from one species. Perhaps we would differ in skin color and eye shape not because of evolution, but because of our origin. I better not say too much on this topic and rather tell you about the next find. Viking silver stash. Just north of Stockholm, archaeologists have discovered a once-in-a-lifetime find. In the municipality of Tabin, one of the houses located in the site of an ancient Viking settlement, researchers dug up a ceramic pot with ancient decorations and silver coins. Inside were 8 neck rings, 2 wrist rings, a finger ring, a pair of pearls, and 12 pendants in the form of coins in a linen bag. Most of all, scientists were interested in the neck rings of the Vikings, which were worn by both women and men. They were about 1,000 years old, but the preservation shocked archaeologists. They looked almost like new despite the fact that they had been underground for 1,000 years. This find is part of a larger find in the site. More than 20 houses and buildings, arrows and rings for amulets were identified here. However, these finds fade against the background of a pot with silver ornaments. Silver treasures are very important. They speak of the wealth of their owner, ancient rulers, their religion and culture. In addition to ornaments, Arab and Norman coins were found in the pot. Everything is clear with silver jewelry. It is not clear why the Vikings stole Anglo-Saxon books. Did they really love to read so much? Books of Anglo-Saxon England. We have often heard about the Dark Ages, but Anglo-Saxon England was not the same as we are told. Their books are considered valuable assets. The first printed books would appear only after a couple of centuries, and therefore, the production of each new book required a huge effort. A team of craftsmen and scribes worked on each book. The production of a new book required a huge amount of labor and time. Therefore, the literature of the Dark Ages has become a symbol of power and wealth. Anglo-Saxon books were highly valued by the Viking invaders. You can read it in the famous Codex Aureus, one of the most sumptuous surviving gospel books from the Anglo-Saxon era. The surviving text of the code mentions that a noble Saxon family bought it from the great pagan army in the middle of the 9th century. Some of the pages in the book are purple. In Anglo-Saxon times, making purple dye required a painstaking process that involved obtaining ink from sea slugs. It is also highly likely that the manuscript originally had a gold-jeweled cover. Thus, you begin to understand the painstaking effort that went into making the book, why it is so attractive to the Vikings, and why the Saxon nobility supposedly paid a huge sum to buy it. Since books became a symbol of wealth and power, the rulers of those times carried books with them even to wars, and later, books began to be given and used as an exchange for other books or jewelry. The book was an ideal gift during diplomatic acts. The only pity is that although books were valued in those days, it was not because of the meaning that it carried, but because of the difficulty of production and high cost. The ship that was able to surprise. Sometimes, the forces of nature seem to laugh at us, throwing us new finds that ask a lot of questions. It's good when archaeologists find something and it immediately explains this or that moment in our history. It's good when they find the remains of ancient animals that were missing in the evolutionary chain. But it's much worse when you manage to find something that defies any logic, and when scientists determine the age of an object, it breaks the whole history. A similar story happened after the melting of the glaciers. A couple of years ago in Myanmar, Russia, melting glaciers exposed an unusual soil consisting of humus and black soil. The researchers said that in this place there was a riverbed. A ship was found in the middle of this fertile layer. This was a boat or a small ship about 10 meters long. The wooden parts of the ship were connected with metal nails, and it seems to be nothing out of the ordinary. But this river was navigable about 20,000 years ago, and after the permafrost covered this area, and only now the ice has melted. The preliminary age of the nails is 6,000 years, but how then did the ship end up here 20,000 years ago? Where it was built? How it was brought here? To whom it belonged? Why, apart from the ship, nothing else was found nearby? I told you there would be more questions than answers. If you believe the alternative history, then at the time of the Cro-Magnons, there already existed a civilization that could quite easily produce metal products. According to the legends of a semi-mythical people of metallurgists once lived here, who knew how to build furnaces, melt various metals, and combine them with each other. It sounds like a fairy tale, but we know that every lie in fiction hides at least a little truth. While we are waiting for new archaeological finds that will help us explain the origin of the old ones, I will tell you a story about a unique person. A person who weighed less than 20 kilograms. Freak shows were very popular in the 19th century. The most unusual and sometimes even strange people were taken there. Unfortunately, almost everyone got there out of desperation. Usually it is difficult for such people to find a job, make friends, and even more so, a family. And the money in such shows paid good. But the hero of our video did not even think about going there to work if not for a terrible illness. Isaac Sprague, after a severe illness, became practically a walking skeleton. With a height of 186 centimeters, he weighed less than 20 kilograms. However, in order to support his family, he performed in freak shows at fairs. The famous entrepreneur Taylor Barnum gathered a unique troupe of those times. He had a human dog, Siamese twins, and the living skeleton of Isaac Sprague. The guy was born in a normal, healthy family, and until the age of 12, nothing foreshadowed trouble. He had an excellent appetite and good nutrition. But at some point, he began to lose weight catastrophically. He continued to help his father at work, only his strength became less and less. Doctors could not explain the reason for the sharp weight loss. At the end of the adolescence, he lost his parents, he could not work physically. For this, he had to look for non-standard part-time jobs. Once at the fair, Taylor Barnum accidentally noticed him and offered him a job. He was making $80 a week, which is about $1,400 in modern times. After 3 years working for Barnum, he decided to take a break from his career, and during this time he met his future wife. Tamara Moore bore him 3 children who grew up to normal size and had no health problems. The family had to be fed, and Sprague had to return to the freak show again. He hated his job. His health was deteriorating, and for a while he carried a flask of milk with him to replenish his energy. From complete impotence, he fell asleep on the go. At some point, he was diagnosed with aggressive muscular atrophy, a disease due to which muscle tissue was depleted. When he realized that he did not have long to live, he signed a contract with one university that after death, his body would be opened and studied. After that, his body can be viewed in a museum. For the so-called service, he was to be given $1,000. However, it is not known for sure whether he managed to carry out this deal and how he left for the next world. Spells from the Book of the Dead. Perhaps I will start my story about the first find from the archaeological cradle, from the place with which archaeology is associated with each of you, Egypt. Saqqara is a gigantic necropolis of the ancient Egyptian capital of Memphis. The last time unusual papyruses were found here was more than 100 years ago, and today archaeologists are incredibly lucky. They found a 16-meter ancient papyrus with spells from the Book of the Dead. As soon as archaeologists found it, they decided that it was 9 meters long, and after restoration and cleaning, they realized that its length was 16 meters. Experts from the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir were engaged in its restoration, where it received its name, Vaziri Papyrus. The uniqueness of this find also lies in the fact that this is the first papyrus that was discovered by an Egyptian and named after an Egyptian. It sounds rather strange, but who then discovered all the finds in Egypt and was engaged in the excavations? For many years, excavations in Egypt have been carried out by archaeologists from all over the world, especially researchers from Great Britain, whose colony was Egypt. They promised to show the papyrus at the opening of the Great Egyptian Museum. At the moment, experts are translating it from hierarchical into hieroglyphic and Arabic, so that every person in the modern world has the opportunity to read spells from the Book of the Dead. The only question is, do we need to read these ancient spells? Write in the comments what you think about this. The Book of the Dead is a funerary text from ancient Egypt containing declarations and spells to aid the dead in the afterlife. The book consists of funerary texts and is dated to 50 BC. The discovery of this mysterious papyrus with spells from the Book of the Dead will shed light on the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians and the transition to the realm of the dead. A ship that was not subject to the laws. During Prohibition in the United States, real chaos was happening in the country. However, gangster groups used this time to their advantage. The most famous gangster in the history, Al Capone, made a real floating casino restaurant from an ordinary barge, in which prohibition did not apply. Here, everyone could do what they wanted. Alcohol and money flowed like a river. Initially, it was assumed that the Coca barge would only be engaged in the transportation of timber, and for some time, the barge barge was used for its intended purpose. From 1889 to 1928, the barge was engaged in the transportation of timber, after which it was turned into a floating dance hall with live music, endless alcohol, and of course, gambling. Access to the barge was only for their own, and among his own, it was Al Capone himself, his inner circle, and of course, local politicians and heads of police stations. In the 30s of the last century, there was more corruption in the United States than alcohol. Al Capone bribed absolutely everyone, and those who did not want to take money went on a voyage to fishes. It would seem that such a ship should live forever, and what could happen to it when it is under the control of the most famous gangster and under the supervision of the police. However, in 1931, a drunken customer shot and killed the restaurant manager, and the following year, the ship sank for unknown reasons. And just the other day, divers Chris Roxburgh and Lee Rosenberg managed to photograph the Kuka barge, which rests at the bottom of the lake. For 40 years of transporting timber, the barge had worn out and leaked water, which was pumped out every day. The person who did this work received a salary in the form of whiskey, which at that time was considered an expensive liquid currency. But it seems to me that the hard worker did not have time to bring his salary to the shore and drink it while working. There was an opinion that local believers deliberately flooded the barge. They did not like that at night screams were heard on the barge, loud music sounded, and sometimes shots were heard. 250 fossilized titanosaur eggs. China is not the only place where large stocks of ancient dinosaur eggs have been preserved. This time, we were pleased by archaeologists from the Indian Institute for Science Education Research and paleontologists from the University of Delhi. In the central and western parts of the country, 256 fossilized eggs of ancient lizards were discovered. In total, researchers have found more than nesting sites of ancient reptiles, titanosaurs, that lived in India 67 million years ago. Paleontologists noticed that most of the eggs were in one place and were pressed against each other. It looks like more than 60 million years ago, a female titanosaur left her eggs here and never returned to this place. All eggs belong to the same species of dinosaur, however, in the nests, their number was different. They also differed in size. This finding of eggs tells us that their population was much larger than previously thought, and they nested in colonies. Titanosaurs ate plants. Giant reptiles lived on the territory of modern Asia, Africa, Europe, and South America during the Upper Cretaceous. It is difficult to imagine that these giants had a body length of up to 9-12 meters and a weight of up to 13 tons, which by the standards of modern animals is a lot. The earliest use of fire for cooking. For the first time, a person learned to make fire about 400,000 years ago. At least it was thought so before. Archaeologists from the Steinhardt Museum of Natural History at Tel Aviv University have made a sensational discovery. They claim to have found evidence of how our ancestors cooked food over a fire some 780,000 years ago. The ability to cook food is actually a big breakthrough in the evolution of our ancestors. After the humanoid beings learned how to heat food, they received an impetus for the development of the brain. It used to take them much longer to chew and digest food. After heat treatment of food, the meat became softer and absorbed by the body much faster, which allowed more time to be spent on building settlements and exploring new territories. They had a large amount of free time that needed to be occupied with something. At this moment, the brain turned on and began to actively invent how to entertain themselves. You might be wondering how archaeologists managed to figure out that the earliest cooking over a campfire was 780,000 years ago. What could they have found that led to such a conclusion? At the archaeological site of Gesher Beno Yaakov in Israel, they found the burnt teeth of a large fish. After analyzing the toothed animal, they were able to find out that the fish was gradually subjected to heat treatment. Most likely it could be baked or boiled. Burnt stones were found nearby, indicating that there was a hearth here. It is so interesting to imagine that almost a million years ago, our ancestors cooked fish for themselves on stones or in an earth kiln in the same way that we do it now on a grill or barbecue. Bas-relief of an eagle in the former capital of the Aztecs. For the first time, archaeologists discovered the eagle bas-relief in February 2020. exactly 3 years ago. And only now, having done a lot of research, they were able to determine the deep meaning of this image. The bas-relief is about 600 years old. It was found at the foot of the Templo Mayor temple, which is located in the center of Tenochtitlan and now Mexico City. Now, archaeologists are sure that the eagle was carved during the reign of Notecuxum-Ilocacamin. About 70 similar sculptures were found in the Templo Mayor temple, but this eagle is the largest of all. Its dimensions are 106 by 70 centimeters. It is not only its size that is striking, but also its significance indicated by its location. The golden eagle is the most important symbol in the Aztec culture, and its location in the center of the temple speaks of the importance of the bas-relief. The eagle was a sacred creature in the mind of the Aztecs who was present at the birth of the sun, hence the blackened, scorched tips of the wings, and was a symbol of one of the elite military awards in the Aztec culture. Mummy Tashfenet. This is the oldest mummy in Africa. In Libya, at the archaeological site of Wan Mehajiak, archaeologists have discovered unique mummies. After a lot of research, scientists said that the mummies are 5,400–5,600 years old. Their uniqueness lies in the fact that their age is older than all previously found in neighboring Egypt. The discovery was made by Professor Fabrizio Mori in 1958. The mummy of a 3-year-old child was found in the fetal position. The embalmed body was carefully wrapped in leaves and covered with an antelope skin. Instead of internal organs, there were some herbs in the body. Scientists are still studying the mixture of herbs to understand how the body was able to survive for almost 6 years. After the discovery of this mummy, archaeologists are sure that the first mummies on the mainland did not appear in Egypt. The Egyptians used mummification techniques borrowed from other people. Ancient Aqueduct of Augustus. In the previous video, I said that one of the most important achievements of ancient Rome, which was still used today, was plumbing. However, it looked different. So archaeologists find parts of aqueducts in the former territories of ancient Rome. They recently discovered an unknown section of the ancient aqueduct of Augustus in Campania. It facilitated the transfer of drinking water from Crypta Neapolitana to Posillipo Hill and Nishida Island and is in excellent condition. At the moment, it is the longest known section of the Augustus aqueduct, which has a length of 647 meters. With the help of this aqueduct, experts in antiquity could regulate the pressure of water from simple to extreme. Now experts will try to dig it out completely and take the soil for analysis to determine how the climate changed during the time of ancient Rome. In fact, the aqueduct is not only practical, water to every house, but also beautiful and majestic. The practice of aqueducts was later used all over the world. The Roman emperors thus wanted to win over the citizens of the empire. During all this time, more than 350 kilometers of aqueducts were built throughout the Roman Empire, and only a small part of them ended up underground. Ancient whale skull. The Goddard family wanted to find a couple of ancient shark teeth. It is a common practice in the United States when amateur paleontologists find fragments of the remains of ancient fish and animals on the shore. They did not find shark teeth, but they found something more outstanding and larger, a real whale skull, which is 12 million years old, and its dimensions are so gigantic that it took 2 months to dig it out. For you to understand, with a skull length of 1.5 meters, its weight was 295 kilograms. Specialists from the Museum of Paleontology congratulated Cody Goddard and his wife on such a find. They said that such a discovery is like winning the Paleontology World Cup. It is preliminarily believed that this is an ancient Miocene baleen whale, but we will find out the exact answer later, when real paleontologists and not amateurs carefully study it. At the moment, this is the best preserved whale skull of all that was found in the Calvert Cliffs area. The baleen whale, or as it is also called the Cetotherium, could swim very quickly, and rightly so, because the megalodon swam nearby. And in order not to fall into the mouth of this predator, the whale needed to move in the ocean as quickly as possible. Further thorough cleaning of the skull before it is shown in the museum may take several more months. Magic amulet in Egypt. And again, we will go to ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have unearthed 20 ancient tombs in the city of New Damietta. In one of the burials, archaeologists found gold items, a statue of the cat goddess, and magical amulets. The burials were dated to 688 BC, which is approximately the 26th dynasty. The shape and material of the tombs differed in composition from raw bricks to simple pits. The tombs contained artifacts made of gold foil. The foil was rolled in the shape of ancient Egyptian gods such as Isis, who was one of the most important deities. There were also golden figures of the cat goddess and the god Horus with the head of a falcon. Ancient texts say that the Egyptian gods had flesh of gold. Such amulets provided protection from the depicted gods and also helped the deceased to find himself in the world of the gods. In addition to golden amulets and statuettes, there were many pottery in the tombs. Also, miniature models of canopic vessels were found in the tombs, which were used to preserve the insides of the deceased during the mummification process. So far, archaeologists cannot give an exact answer to whom the tombs belonged, but the number of valuable artifacts found here is simply amazing. Cocoons of Condo Lagoon. In Peru, in the city with the interesting name Lamabamba, a museum was opened in 2000, which housed 200 creepy mummies and funeral accessories. They were discovered in 1997 in Lake Tocha, a Chachapoa settlement on the shores of Lake Laguna de los Condores, 80 kilometers south of Chachapoas. The museum maintains a certain temperature so that the mummies can continue to be kept in good shape and frighten museum visitors. Some mummies show fear and agony on their faces. From their gaze, the blood freezes in the veins of visitors. In the remote northwestern region of the Andes is the mountain lake Laguna de los Condores, which has kept an amazing secret for more than 500 years. There were a number of tombs in the limestone cliffs around the lake. For 500 years, no one touched these burial structures until local farmers began to dig everything up here. Many artifacts were damaged in the course of such excavations. Archaeologists quickly began to excavate in this place in order to protect the graves from looting. Unfortunately, about 200 unusual mummies were saved. In order to place them all in one place, a climate control museum had to be built. The sight of mummies will not leave anyone indifferent. Some of the dead look at you with a frozen, tormented expression. Sometimes the faces are so well preserved that it seems that they can still blink. Several babies sit on the shelves, their tiny bodies neatly wrapped in cloth. Now anyone can see the mummies, and archaeologists continue to study them. Norwegian archaeologists, while carrying out field work in the central part of the country, unearthed a grave of about 1,100 years old, in which a Viking warrior rested, buried with all his weapons. Researchers write that a man who died around 800–900 AD is buried in the grave. His burial was found near the historic village, which today bears the name of Viniera. It is located south of Trøndelag County. The man was buried with a full set of weapons: an axe, a spear, a shield, and a sword. This says a lot about the status of the buried. First, as archaeologists have established, this man was a free man and a farmer. Second, he was a warrior. During the Viking and early Middle Ages, most warriors were free people who had their own farms. It is the sword that makes this grave special. It's not even about its good preservation. The sword was laid on the left side, although earlier in similar burials, swords were always found on the right side of the deceased. This led scientists to the idea that the warrior was left-handed. Although in this regard, the burial practice of the Vikings looks a little strange. It would seem that for a right-handed person, it is more convenient to lay the sword to the left, so that the warrior can freely grab it with his right hand. However, these weapons were always stowed to the right. In this case, the ritual was broken. By the way, the grave of the alleged left-handed warrior partially overlapped the graves of 3 other warriors buried in the ditch. It surrounded one of the large mounds. These people obviously did not enjoy great honor and respect. In addition, in ancient times, burials were often used several times. In the same ring ditch, archaeologists discovered a 4th grave, which surprised them. Probably a woman was buried there who was cremated either at an early stage of the Viking Age or before it. Funerary gifts were found in this burial: a well-preserved bead, an oval brooch, and scissors. It was from these artifacts that the sex of the buried person was determined. Ring of Phoenician. Phoenician's ring was found in Britain in the late 1700s. It is very large, weighs 12 grams, has a peculiar design and an inscription in Latin, Phoenician, live in peace with God. A few decades later, an ancient clay tablet was found that was related to the ring. The inscription on it was made by a certain Roman named Silvian, who complained to the god Nodens that his ring had been stolen by Phoenician. The tablet said, "He who bears the name of Phoenician will not have a single grain of health until he returns the ring to the temple of Nodens." To many, these details will sound familiar. Oxford University professor and aspiring author John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was intimately familiar with the story of the cursed ring and used it in his novel The Lord of the Rings. Ancient mummies in the mine. In Chile, while working to expand the copper mine, workers came across 4 mummies that are likely to be over 2,000 years old. The remains of 4 mummified people dressed in bright colors have been found in the Quebrada Blanca copper mine in northern Chile. These people were buried in official graves, that is, a certain ritual was observed during their burial. The mummies are reported to be very well preserved, which was probably facilitated by the arid climate. People were buried wearing exquisite turban-like headdresses and sandals. Now scientists are analyzing to determine the exact age of the finds. By indirect evidence, they have already established that the mummies may belong to the early period of the formation of Mesoamerica, which lasted approximately between 1100 and 400 BC. As a result of soil salinity, lack of rainfall, and relatively low humidity, the remains were mummified in full gear, along with a number of tools indicating the lifestyle of these people. By the way, scientists will now keep a close eye on the mine, as it is planned to be used for almost 30 more years. This means that it will continue to expand, therefore, workers may stumble upon other burials and artifacts. Maori whip. Captain James Reddy Clarendon was one of the first European settlers in New Zealand. He promoted dialogue between the indigenous Maori people and the European colonialists, was the chairman of the first Bank of New Zealand and the first US consul in the country. The Clarendon House Museum contains many items and artifacts, many of which once belonged to the Maori tribe. Apparently, the thief who once climbed into the museum did not know that all Maori artifacts bring a curse to those who mistreat them. He stole a Maori whip with a handle made from whalebone. The stolen thing returned to the museum a month later. It was personally handed over by a friend of the thief, saying that before that, the gates to hell had opened. All misfortunes fell upon him. The thief was never charged, given that the whip returned and the thief had already been punished by some higher court. Mammoth tusk carving technology. Siberian archaeologists have studied figurines carved from mammoth ivory and managed to reconstruct the technology used by ancient people to create items about 20,000 years ago. Archaeologists from the Siberian Federal University and Novosibirsk State University, Russia, during excavations discovered unique beads and other jewelry made from mammoth tusk. Thanks to the technologies used, the figurines have a unique character of fulfillment. However, scientists managed to reconstruct this technology in detail. Scientists have discovered unique jewelry in the Kizhemsky district of the Krasnoyarsk territory at the mouth of the Kova River. Siberian archaeologists have been conducting research here for several decades. In addition to beads, scientists managed to find tools and other ancient things in this place. The world's first thread. Somewhere in the era of the Upper Paleolithic in the territory of today's western Georgia, a man invented a thread. It would seem an ordinary invention, but it changed a lot, allowing our ancestors to weave and mend clothes, create shoes, and surround themselves with simple interior items. In general, one more step into modern civilization which humanity has made on the territory of our country. Before this find, a natal find found in the Czech Republic was considered the oldest thread from the Imereti region. But the Georgian linen thread, discovered in 2007, is almost 5,000 years older. Holy Grail of the Nazis. In 2001, a Bavarian diver found a pot made of 10.5 kilograms of gold at the bottom of the local lake Chiemsee, 70 kilometers east of Munich. The artifact had value in itself, but the researchers were confused by the coinage made in the style of Celtic counterparts 2,000 years ago. In particular, scientists were well aware of the so-called Gundestrup pot discovered in 1891 in the Danish peat box, a superbly preserved silver vessel with rich Celtic decoration. It has been dated to the 1st millennium BC. However, after the examination, it was found that the pot from Chiemsee was made relatively recently, most likely in the 1930s. Further, it turned out that a certain Alfred Knott, a jeweler of the Munich company Theodor Hayden, told in the 1960s before his death that in the early 1930s he made a certain golden pot, weighing about 10 kilograms by order of Albert Pitch, a major industrialist and director of the Elektrochemische Werke Munich. Pitch, a staunch Nazi and a supporter of Hitler, eventually received the high title of Wehrwirtschaftsführer, leader of the war economy, which was given to the heads of the most important enterprises of the Third Reich. Apparently, it was he who ordered the discovery in Lake Chiemsee. It is not clear how it ended up at the bottom of the reservoir, but it is known that on the shores of the lake it was planned to build a monumental complex of the highest school of the NSDAP, the main and most elite Nazi university, which was to become the leading educational and scientific center of the entire Third Reich. It is possible that the pot, made in the image and likeness of the ancient Celtic vessels, could be intended for this organization. The Nazis knew a lot about this kind of artifacts with a semi-esoteric function. One of the main mysteries of Jerusalem. In Israel, archaeologists during excavations in Jerusalem discovered unique seals about 2,500 years old. The decoding of the symbols printed on them showed that the city of David was not abandoned by the inhabitants after the Babylonian conquest. One of the black spots in the history of Jerusalem is the period of the so-called Babylonian conquest or Babylonian captivity. It is mentioned in the Bible. It is known that the city of David was destroyed by the Babylonian army in 586 BC. However, practically nothing is known about what happened in the city in subsequent years. One popular hypothesis is that the surviving townspeople fled and settled elsewhere. Seals found in Jerusalem indicate that bureaucracy flourished in Jerusalem during this little studied period of time, and this means that the city continued to live and gradually recovered. Rare artifacts have been discovered during excavations near the walls of the old city. Previously, only 10 such artifacts were found in all of Israel, dating from the Persian period, circa 536 BC, 333 BC. The seals were made from clay. One of them apparently was official, and the second was made in a handicraft way. Perhaps it was a fake seal or a seal made by an illiterate official who stood at the lowest hierarchical level. According to archaeologists, the artifacts indicate that there were several levels of bureaucracy in the resurgent Jerusalem. The Bible also talks about the bureaucracy that existed in Jerusalem during this period of time. Treasure with coins over 1,000 years old. During archaeological excavations in Israel, teenage volunteers found a clay vessel with 425 gold coins buried about 1.1 thousand years ago. According to the publication, most of the coins date from the period of early Islam, when the region was part of the Abbasid Caliphate. The coins are made of 24-karat gold and weighed 845 grams. At that time, these coins could buy a luxurious house in one of the cities of the Caliphate. The man who buried this treasure 1,100 years ago must have wanted to come back for it, even securing the vessel with a nail to keep it from moving. Finding such a large cache of gold coins is extremely rare, they say, as the gold was often melted down and reused in later cultures. Burial with round graves. In Osaka, in preparation for the construction of a new railway station, a burial with round graves was discovered, in which 350 people were buried. The place where the excavations are being carried out is called Umira's tomb. This is one of the 7 burials in Osaka known to scientists. In addition to round graves, archaeologists have found vertical burials, which contain the remains of several people. Scientists believe that people who died as a result of illness could be buried in common graves. The burial dates from the end of the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868. Also, bones of piglets and horses were found at the site of the burial ground. A cat bone was found in one of the human burials. Now all human remains are sorted and analyzed. After that, they will be reburied in a new place. Remains of an ancient man. Georgia is the birthplace of the European. Yes, dear Germans, Italians, and French, you heard me right. You all come from Georgia. In the 90s of the last century, a real sensation was found on the territory of this country. Female and male bones, whose age was about 1.8 million years. Scientists dubbed the found Zezva anemzia, gave the new species the name Homo georgicus, Georgian man, and proved that these are the oldest representatives of the Homo genus after those found in Africa. This allows us to authoritatively state that European civilization originates precisely in Georgia. Detailed description of the made-up artifact. To this day, not only images of the appearance of Vedras have survived, but also descriptions of their work. According to Indian myth, the Vedra was an ideal weapon. It always hit the target, but it was as strong as a diamond and never broke. But how could a fictional artifact ever break if it is completely fictional? We are talking about lightning here. Why even invent an object to shoot with if the gods could directly command them? Again, the logical failure of the official versions of history. After all, it doesn't make any sense. Descriptions of the characteristics of the Vedra about strength and accuracy give reason to think, but was it not a real object? It has two earthly and ordinary characteristics for divine attributes. And from the descriptions of the Vedra, we can conclude that although it did not break, it was possible to hit it, and since it did not miss enemies, it could shoot at non-enemies as well. That is, the descriptions of the divine artifacts are more suitable for a real-life object than a simple fiction. Roasted nuts in antiquity. Of course, roasted nuts don't seem like much of a surprise these days, and everyone, and even you at least once in your life, tried this amazing delicacy. But in ancient times, people were not so willing to cook food. Why roast nuts if they're already tasty and healthy? The other thing is meat. So scientists from the Center for Baltic and Scandinavian Archaeology claim that people in Germany mastered the technology of roasting hazelnuts about 10,000 years ago. Personally, I like cashews more. And which nuts do you like? Write in the comments under the video. In the Dubensee swamp in northern Germany, archaeologists have found 10,500-year-old cremated bones. By the way, these are the first bones discovered at this place and the oldest ones that could be found on the territory of present-day Germany. Historians believe that the Dubensee was once a lake where people used to catch fish, which they cooked on a fire nearby. And at that very moment, the hazelnuts were roasted. That is, people in ancient times were those gourmets. Most likely, people came to this place in autumn and collected nuts. Archaeologists have found smaller and larger hazelnut roasting pits. They also found bark mats for sitting on damp soil and pieces of worked flint. Local tools are very similar to those found in Britain. This proves that people in ancient times exchanged experience with the neighboring region. To get to each other, they used a Doggerland land corridor, which is now flooded due to climate change. The most interesting thing is that flint is not found in nature in this region. It was brought here from another place, and archaeologists discovered the bones of ancient people here quite by accident. Now we know that roasted hazelnuts were once very popular in Germany, and in Japan, they discovered a terrible message from antiquity. A warning from the depth of time. Japan is one of the most developed countries in the world, while located in one of the most dangerous regions of the planet. An entire country with a population of many millions lives in danger every day. The most interesting thing is that this has always been the case throughout the existence of this region, and people have lived here for centuries. This forced the ancestors of the Japanese to understand natural phenomena. Throughout Japan, there are so-called tsunami stones. These are ancient plates with inscriptions that warn that it is dangerous to build houses below a certain mark. If a tsunami happens, the houses in this place will flood. One of the most famous of these stones is located in the village of Naoc. A text is carved on a 3-meter slab that reads, "High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the disaster of the Great Tsunami. Do not build houses below this point." On other stones, a warning is written that people should be afraid of an earthquake because after it, a tsunami will come. Stone slabs of this kind are found all over the Japanese coastline, and some of them over 600 years old. The problem is that many Japanese do not believe this kind of prediction written on stones. It seems to them that these are just ancient curses. They build their homes in dangerous regions, after which entire families suffer and die. It seems to me that people in ancient times, when placing these stones, experienced more than one tragedy, and which they decided to warn, after which they decided to warn their descendants. Well, the descendants consider themselves smarter than their ancestors. We don't want to listen to our grandparents either, do we? Yes, the ancestors did not have high technologies and modern measuring instruments, but they had well-developed senses of observation and some worldly wisdom. Therefore, we should definitely listen to our past. That's what archaeologists did with the next find. Kensington Runestone. Discovered in 1898 in central Minnesota, this enigmatic stone is a beautiful piece of stone engraved with many ancient Scandinavian letters. Yes, Scandinavian letters in North America. Archaeologists and historians have long puzzled over the dating of the Kensington stone and determined it to be 1362. Were the ancient Vikings able to get to this place in the 14th century? This find was of great interest to local Swedes and Americans who live in Minnesota. But linguists were not so happy with the find. About 100 years ago, experts almost unanimously declared that a certain work of the 19th century was written on the stone. Despite some disputes between scientists and historians, it is still believed that this work is about 100 years old. Why then does the dating indicate the 14th century, and who is right? Is it possible the historians here do not want to agree that this stone is older than it seems, otherwise they will have to rewrite history and many historical events that are now so well placed in school textbooks. And as we know, humanity is in no hurry to write the truth so as not to cause people to panic. If it was still possible to read the ancient Scandinavian texts, then with Maya writing, everything is much more complicated. How a scientist deciphered the Mayan script. The greatest discovery in the study of ancient Mexico was made by the Soviet ethnographer Yuri Knarazov. He did what no one else had done before. He found the key to reading ancient Mayan writing. Although he first visited Mexico only 40 years after his discovery, yes, you can make world-class discoveries from thousands of kilometers away. Yuri Knarazov was an interesting, mysterious, and silent person. There were various stories and tales about him. He was fond of mysticism, Indians, and the decipherment of ancient writing. As I said earlier, he came to Mexico decades after his discovery. It was in the 90s of the last century. He was greeted as a local star, as an artist, while in Russia, where he lived all his life, few people knew about him. He was born in Kharkiv in 1922 in a Russian intelligent family. During World War II, he and his family moved to Moscow, where he became interested in ethnography. Later, he moved to Leningrad. Back in Moscow, Knarazov came across an article by the German scientist Paul Schalhes, who argued that deciphering the Mayan script was an impossible task. The young scientist took it as a challenge, and he believed that if something was created by the human mind, that it could be unraveled by another human mind. While still a student at Moscow University, Knarazov helped sort out the archive of war trophies from Germany, and among the materials of the Berlin Library, discovered an edition of 3 surviving handwritten Mayan codes published in 1930. In addition, he came across another important document, the Report on Affairs in the Yucatan of the 16th century. It was written by the Catholic bishop Diego de Landa after the Spanish conquest of Mexico and the Maya. After studying the documents, he realized that each Mayan sign is read as a syllable and proposed a system for reading the entire language. In 1952, the scientist published an article, Ancient Writing of Central America, in an ethnographic journal where he outlined his method. His work was appreciated in scientific circles and he received an offer to write a dissertation on this topic. When Yuri Knarazov began to decipher the ancient texts of the Maya more, he realized that this mysterious civilization had its own script, army, and administrative apparatus. This means that the Maya had a state. It was previously believed that the ancient Maya were barbarians and conquerors. After deciphering ancient texts, the scientist received many awards. He was awarded in the USSR. Students and officials came to him from Guatemala, Mexico, and the USA. He has been compared to Jean Champollion, who deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs in the 19th century. During his trip to Mexico and Guatemala, the scientist visited all the significant places of the ancient Maya, Palenque, Merida, Axmal, and with his own eyes saw the writings of the Maya. From the Mexican ambassador to Russia, he received an honorary award, the Order of the Aztec Eagle, which he was very proud of. In the meantime, archaeologists are trying to study another mystical find: stone thread connecting the eras. Funeral practices throughout history have been full of mysteries. All people for thousands of years buried the dead in different ways. At the place of burial of the deceased relatives, people from ancient times erected memorial structures, steles, mounds, later obelisks, crosses, monuments. The more prominent the deceased was, the more expressive his grave looked. The ancient Egyptians buried their rulers in giant pyramids. The peoples of Asia poured mounds from the ground or laid them out of stone. Residents of Altai in Russia called such sculptures kazatach. These stone giants have survived wars and natural disasters, cataclysms, and negligent human attitude. Tombstones look like real people. Many have pronounced facial features, clothing, and even jewelry. On the best preserved idols, even belts with typesetting plaques are visible. Their number and material during life determine the status of a person in society. Archaeologists have discovered a large number of stone statues in the Altai Mountains. This indicates their mass production. Scientists concluded that in ancient times, people picked up stones so that they were easier and less processed. The stone ancestors of the Altai Mountains can tell a lot about the people who lived here, how they looked, how they dressed, what they fought, what they ate. For a long time, nothing was known about them. They were far from prying eyes, and only recently they began to be found and studied en masse. Kazatach is the memory of ancestors. This is a thread that binds entire generations, and in no case should you break such a thread. A people without a past has no future. From Russia, we will go to America, where interesting artifacts are waiting for us. Relics of Michigan. Did an ancient advanced culture once live in Michigan in the USA? The digger James Oscotford tried to answer this question, who in October 1890 found ancient artifacts in Ardmore, Michigan. Cups, figurines, and inscribed tablets were very reminiscent of finds found in the Middle East. Other diggers in the region have made similar finds besides Scotford. All artifacts were sold to buyers and collectors. It's just something else that's interesting. The vast majority of historians and archaeologists claim that all these finds are carefully planned forgery. They believe that the so-called artifacts were well thought out and copied from other artifacts found around the world. After our hero created ancient artifacts, he decided to bury them so that later he and other diggers would find them. Thus, everything would look realistic and believable. Clay objects crumbled at the slightest contact with water. How they could then be stored in the ground for thousands of years? Ancient writings were chaotically written on tablets without any pattern or logic. The figurines were a copy of the finds found in the Far East. only their quality was much lower and not so durable. These were the main arguments of archaeologists who conducted a superficial analysis of the ancient relics of Michigan. One thing is for sure, James Scottford wanted to make money, and he did a great job of it. But the next find discovered in Mexico is the real one. Rare Mayan canoe. I have already talked about the decoding of the Maya writing, and now let's look at the transport used by the Maya. In the previous video, if someone has not seen it, I already said that during the construction of the Mayan train railway route, archaeologists constantly find ancient buildings and artifacts of a mysterious civilization. This time on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, archaeologists found a well-preserved wooden canoe. The canoe was found in a freshwater reservoir, a cenote. It was completely submerged in water and at the same time perfectly preserved. The marshland is a great help to preserve ancient objects due to the low amount of oxygen. The length of the canoe is 1.5 meters, the width is 80 centimeters. According to preliminary data, the canoe was used as a container for storing water or a container for offering during ritual purposes and dates back to approximately 830–950 AD. This canoe is the only one of its kind that has survived in its original form, although it is more than 1,000 years old. Scientists will create a 3D model of the canoe. This will help to better and safer study the ancient object. During the construction of the railway route, archaeologists discovered more than 80 Mayan burials and the ruins of more than 2,400 pre-Hispanic structures. Ecologists, archaeologists, as well as representatives of Mayan communities actively oppose the construction of railway line. You can see some other finds in this place in the previous video on the channel, but only after watching this video, because the next mysterious object will definitely surprise you. Lonely Red Mountain. Australian Aborigines call this mountain Uluru. European discoveries named it as rock almost 150 years ago. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary in this mountain, an ordinary rock formation in the middle of a semi-desert, but the number of tourists was amazing. Every year, this figure reached hundreds of thousands of people. The peak of the popularity of this mountain in October 2019. It was then that local authorities forbade tourists to climb it, and in September 2020, Google even removed Street View 3D panoramas from their online maps. Mount Uluru is located in the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park in Central Australia. This block was formed from sedimentary rocks 680 million years ago. Uluru is 3.5 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide, and 348 meters high from base to top. In most of the photos, Uluru looks like a completely lonely mountain, which definitely adds to its mystery. Archaeologists say that people lived near this mountain 10,000 years ago. The first Europeans arrived in Australia in 1788, but reached Mount Uluru only 100 years later in 1870, all because of the specific arid climate. For local Aborigines, the mountain is a sacred place. There are legends about it, and traditional religious rites are held next to it. In order for local people to have the opportunity to visit this place, local authorities turned the territory into the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park. Red Mountain has become one of the main attractions of Australia, so an airport was built 20 kilometers from this place. Now from 300 to 400,000 tourists come here every year, and it was because of the invasion of tourists that this place became more closed. Wherever human footsteps, debris and destruction remain. Have mountains of garbage caused the removal of 3D panoramas from Google Maps? It is possible to climb the mountain without the help of climbing equipment, but this doesn't mean that it is easy to do so. Over the past 50 years, about 40 people have died here. For this reason, local authorities have banned climbing to the top. How wonderful that there is a Google that allows you to go to the mountain using a smartphone or a computer, but the local natives did not like it. Let me remind you that the mountain is a sacred place, and some places on the mountain are taboo for them. Not only can they not be visited, but even seeing them is a terrible violation, even if it's just a photo. Modern natives also use smartphones, and in order not to accidentally see photos of these places on the internet, Google at the request of local authorities removed the pictures previously uploaded by tourists. It's good that there is our channel that will tell you more and show you amazing and unique artifacts of antiquity. Subscribe so you don't miss a new video. Thanks for the views. Bye everyone!